and attributed to beliefs, and oh, it's an absolute. Oh yeah, it's an absolute in reality. Oh yeah. No, it's an absolute in your consciousness that you're projecting as an absolute in reality. It may be real, but again, I've said this again and again. If you cannot verify it in reality, then it is not verifiable in veracity in reality, and it's not a veritas, it's not a truth in reality, because it doesn't have veracity through the verifiability, the veris, in reality. It's simple. Follow the words and what they mean. So, solute, an absolute, from one to the other. A solute is freed from being a substance alone, possibly unpure, corrupted by something else. Then the absolute is freed more from being bound in solution as a solute with a solvent. So even though the substance one was freed from being its impure self, mixed in with the substance, another substance, so now it's a solute in solution, it's no longer bound in itself with the pollutants. The pollutants have been extracted from itself and they're dispersed in a solution. Now you need to take that solution, refine it, and you can obtain the substance alone again, but purer, of a higher quality. And in doing so, now you have more of an absolute. Instead of just being a solute that was less refined, now it's more refined. So in terms of the next slide, we'll have the pure etymology. So in terms of the pure etymology, it gets weird. To try to understand these terms, you have to really go and reflect it in reality to understand how these words reflect reality and what they really mean. Because all it is solute is freed, and then you have absolute, so it's away from being freed. So one is freed and one's away from being freed. So you're jailed, you're restricted when you're absolute, because solute means freed, but no, absolute means unrestricted, so it can't mean restricted. If it's away from freed, away from unrestriction, means it's going towards restriction. Absolute, away from freed, away from unrestriction, towards restriction, but absolute actually means unrestriction. So when you look at the word absolute and you look at the word solute, they mean the same thing in definitions and dictionaries. It's really confusing. It took me a few days to iron this out and finally grasp it. And this is how it works, is you're freed in one context, you're freed from the polluted state, and then but you still have the polluted state around you in a solution, so then you're freed once again from that solution state and also from the original impure state, and you become an absolute which is unrestricted and freed. So the solute is like an intermediary step between a substance becoming an absolute. If you look at how it works, the substance is impure, and then it needs to become a solute in a solution where it's first freed and dissolved, but it still has it around it, and then it needs to be refined and coalesced back into a substance again, but without those impure substances being there, so they don't become part of the substance again once it's refined. It stays back in the solvent, which was the acid that ate away at the impurities and allowed the substance as a solute to refine it, to become refined again as an absolute. So this is the whole process. I hope it was understandable. Infographic 16. This is the etymology on absolute and relative. So absolute, we have some synonyms. Independent, unconditional, unchanging, free from any conditions or limitations and relations, complete in itself and fixed. So that's the goal when you're trying to refine something, is you make it where it was once joined with impurities, now it's more independent, unconditional and unchanging from those impurities. You've made it more towards the pure state that you're seeking, and then you require less changes to make it into that purer state. You might still require some as part of the alchemical process, but as a conceptual term, the absolute is something as a concept to where it's something that's unchanging. It's not dependent on any conditions around it, so the external conditions don't affect it. So in terms of alchemical self-transformation, you can look at it as where you're unconditional, you're absolute in your service to truth and morality, and you don't waver from that purity, that quality, that refinement of self, and you stay independent and unconditional and unchanging towards that absolute. So this is a way it can make sense in real life. So it's unrestricted, complete, perfect, not relative to something else. Viewed apart from modifying influences or without comparison with other objects. So it's loosed from any other being or comparison. It's freed. So of course, when you think of conceptions of the all absolute, the one absolute, which is the truth, right? The truth is the absolute, which is what people confuse, and they can confabulate with the symbolism and trying to answer questions about meaning and purpose and value in life, and then the truth becomes, quote, God. That's why God is truth and truth is God. Anyways, that's part 4. Like I said, it all mixes up, and I've tried to separate it into different presentations for time purposes and organization. But it's absolute. You're not going to be, if you're absolute in your devotion for truth, you're not going to waver and then be corrupted and be modified by the influences of others. So ab is off, away from, cognate with Greek apo, which is away from or from. Like apotheosis or apophysis. Solutus is dissolved, loosened, released. The past participle of solvere, to release or dissolve. Like I said, it's the past participle. Solutus, solute, past participle, and solvent is the thing that does the dissolving on the solute. It's the active agent that does the loosening. One thing is loosened, and one thing does the loosening. That's how the relationship between a solute and a solvent. So, absolute, away from dissolved, not mixed, as a solute in solution with a solvent. So if you want to look at the difference between absolute and solute, since the solute is in solution with a solvent, well, how's the absolute different? Well, the absolute is away from that dissolved state as a solvent in a solution, where you're dissolved even with all the impurities. So you're not mixed in this solute in solution with a solvent. You're formed. Now you're reformed. But you're reformed in an unadulterated way. You don't have all the impurities anymore, right? You've gotten the impurities out. The impurities, you've refined yourself, and you've become more pure. So in alchemy, we refine impurity to the absolute. That's what we do, as I have explained in the previous infographic when I was describing the process. So we have absolute, and then we have relative, which is viewed as the opposite of absolute. Absolute was independent, unconditional, unchanging, whereas relative is dependent, conditional, and changing. Everything in reality is relative to everything else, and anyways, I'll be getting into this more, but there's relative and absolute perspectives in everything. There's relative and absolute perspectives in the things that exist in reality, and there's a relative and absolute perspective in the things that might not even exist yet as the optimal, better way of living, the good way of living that we can create in reality. But there's relative and absolute in different ways of looking at things, which I'll be getting into. So relative, dependent, conditional, changing, connected to or depending on something else. Comparative, capable to be changed. Usually when you think of something as absolute, it doesn't change, it's become an absolute, it's become its most pure form. But again, in spiritual alchemy, it's a goal. It's an end to strive for, to become. Not that you may actually ever become absolute or whatever. It's a conceptual framework to live by, to work towards. Relative is having reference or relation. Refer, to carry back or bring back, to ascribe. So, when you're trying to improve yourself, you're comparing, you're changing. So you're always in relative reality, changing, but you're changing towards, if you want to, if this is the goal in your mind, to improve yourself, to evolve in transcendental consciousness and higher living, and you refine yourself in purity towards that absolute. You're changing towards the unchanging, that perfected ideal thing that you may never reach, but it doesn't matter, you can always change yourself to become more of it. Because again, it's an absolute in mind, in consciousness. That T2 better, this will be coming up in another slide, but once you've actualized one T2 potential, it becomes an actual, and then you can envision from that level of existence and condition, you can see more betterment. Since you've actualized one level of betterment, you can envision another level of betterment. And then you can seek to actualize that potential that you envision as a T2 potential in consciousness, a truth level 2 potential. And you can seek to actualize that absolute into reality. And then that absolute might be actualized, but then there's more good to envision and create under. So you see how it's a relative absolute? It's relative to where you are in time. That absolute you envision in consciousness. It's an absolute, it is what it is. It's the good that you need to strive towards, it's absolute. And then you reach it, so that the absolute comes into the relative, the T2 is manifested into the T1, and then you can aspire to another level of T2, to some other absolute. So relative, RE, back again, and lattice, to carry or bear. To carry back requires something and somewhere to carry it to. Hence, relative changes. You need more than one. It's not absolute where it's apart from everything else. It's completely isolated. What was it? Perfect, not relative to something else, unrestricted and complete. So once you've actualized a level of goodness, a pure absolute potential in your mind of good, once you've actualized it, well, it becomes an absolute in you because you've completed it. That absolute in your consciousness has now become embodied through you living in reality. So now you've completed that aspect of an absolute, and now it is part of you living in reality, but you're not the absolute, as the absolute is the truth, which is a concept to represent all of reality in the universe. That's all it's for. But we confuse ourselves and convolute our symbolic references to reality, and then all of a sudden that becomes God, some objectified, reified, external existent force or being somewhere else that exists, even though it's not verifiable. There's no veracity behind it. It's just an imagined concept to provide an answer to questions we have about sources, source of existence, source of ourselves, source of consciousness, source of everything. It's a fit-all, magical, wonder-fit-all. It's not falsifiable. It answers everything, and it's the go-to answer when you don't have an answer to a question, because God made it that way, or whatever. There's all these ridiculous apologetics for God, and beliefs in God, and beliefs in what God does, and the control God has over our lives, and it's all purely, all of it, I'm making sure you get this, is from consciousness. It's not from reality. All of these conceptions people have are from convoluted conceptions of reality, twisted into symbolic references by externalizing, anthropomorphizing, personifying, projecting, reifying, and objectifying aspects of consciousness into reality as if they were existent things, in order to give them the appearance of existence so that you can believe in them as an existent thing, as a truth, even though it's not there. You've never verified it. It's not verifiable, but you believe it as a truth because of this process that I just demonstrated, that I'm explaining. I just did in 10 seconds ago. This process that we continually go through to answer questions and project and personify, anthropomorphize aspect of ourselves and try to create symbolic references and invent things to try to explain ourselves and aspects of reality through ourselves or through something else to explain ourselves. And this has been done in religions in the past. Learn about religions, learn about John Marco Allegro's work on the past and idols and worships and symbolism. And there's a lot of learning to do. I'm giving you what I know, what I understand about reality and how things are formed, how we create symbols and concepts and ideas and imaginations, and what is truth in reality and existence as a concept, and how to determine it. So to carry back requires something and somewhere to carry it to. Relative changes. Absolute goes nowhere. Nothing happens in an absolute. Being an absolute in reality is a static state, frozen, a snapshot in time. Now, this is going to be this is the whole part of my presentation in part 3, which is all about being and becoming and how it relates to truth, how it relates to truth level 1 and truth level 2, and how it relates to absolute and relative. That presentation, like I said, it'll be interesting for those who are interested, but it'll help you understand certain conceptual references to reality, but it's not really important. It's not teaching you about why government's evil or whatever morality. It's conceptual constructs that we can use to reference parts of reality. So if you do reference parts of reality using these symbolic references of absolute, relative, being, or becoming, then that presentation might be highly valuable to you. But it's not done yet. Upcoming. So as I was saying with the rock example earlier, how it's just being, it's static. Well, that's an absolute. Anything in reality is an absolute. My body is an absolute, but it's an absolute that persists in time because of my self-replication capacities of the cells and everything, and the high energy consumption that gives me stability as a biological construct, where I consume energy to replicate my persistence into the future. A rock doesn't have that. A rock is static. We are dynamic. We are life. We are moving. There's two forms of life. There's biological life and then there's consciousness life. So again, that's for later presentation there. But there's a lot of terms to get through and a lot of understandings to specifically elucidate, to understand all the intricacies. So that's why I'm all over the place in information, because I'm trying to tie everything together. So the rock is a static state. It doesn't change. It doesn't do anything. It just persists into the future. We're the ones who have the capacity for change and to change our reality because of the power of consciousness. Not simply the biological capacity. Oh, my biology replicates. My biology changes. Cells continue into the future. I grow or a plant grows. So what? Biological life isn't what changes reality. What has an effect to alter and change reality. Not create reality, but to affect, alter, and change reality. That's the power of consciousness. Now this is the dynamic power in reality. It's not fixed. It's not frozen. It's not just being a rock. It's not just absolute as a rock. We have an absolute capacity. We are made of matter. That's what we have. We have an absolute capacity, but the thing that changes is consciousness. That's the thing that has the most capacity for change, the most dynamic and the most instant capacity for change. The body and the rocks and everything else that is just not dynamic, that's not in motion, it's just being a body and basic self-replication to persist into the future. That's how it changes. It changes through self-replication. It differs from biological matter that's fixed completely. Not biological matter, non-biological matter that's fixed completely like a rock. When you have biological matter, it changes at the matter state. Well, just above the atomic state there, but in the matter molecular component, there's changes always going on. So that's the life above matter as a biological construct, but the higher life is in consciousness. That's where the true change, the true movement, the true dynamic of living is. That's where becoming is, and that's because it's relative to what's going on in reality, and we can change. The absolute is fixed. The rock is fixed. It's not going to change into something else. It doesn't. It's not an active agent. It doesn't have that capacity. All right, that's enough of this presentation. This slide. Infographic 17, this is another clarification of terms. It doesn't really deal specifically with the work I'm doing in here, although in pretty much all of my work it deals with dualities, such as good versus evil, truth versus false, right versus wrong, moral versus immoral, real versus unreal, etc. So those are dualistic components, and in duality, well, in polarity there is duality. In duality there isn't necessarily a polarity. You can have dual conceptual frameworks that do not require polarized implementations, but in every polarized implementation there is always a duality. So this is a clarification on this aspect of what is a duality, what is a polarity, in order for you to properly conceive of what are possible dualistic or polarized aspects of reality, and whether they can unite in what is unity in this context. Not true unity in morals, but in unity in the poles. What does unity mean when you're talking about poles? Does it mean the two poles unite? No, the two poles don't unite. And you will see why. So yes, it does relate to my presentation material, pretty much all of them. So that's why it's here, because people have a hard time discussing what a duality is and what a polarity is, and they're very convoluted in their expressions of these symbols and how they reflect reality. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to explain these symbols as they are etymologically created, and also demonstrate them as to how they relate to reality itself, rather than just etymologically. So, duality, from dualis, dual, duo, two, twofold, dichotomy, quality of being two parts, acting as a counterpart. So that's the different ways dualities can apply. So you can apply it as a classification into two subclasses, just two things, twofold, or you can express it as a dichotomy of two opposed parts. Now, polarity is from polar, meaning pertaining to poles. Polis, an end of an axis. And then we have Proto-Indo-European root qual, which is turn around, or quell, wheel, turn, roll around. So if you're familiar with my work on, what have I done in two presentations? I think it was in Ka, Kamat, and the Wheel of Life symbolism, elemental quaternity, and maybe Egyptian Ka and alphabet symbolism, maybe in those three, or two of the three. Anyways, the wheel, turning around, relating it to Rota, Dharma, Karma, Wheel of Life, the Wheel of Fortune, the Eye of Providence. It's all about turning in reality, living in reality, and what comes ahead in the wheel, you're rolling towards something. It's coming ahead, you're going towards the future. Well, that's what it's about. It's all about synderesis and syneidesis. Syneidesis, knowledge of the past, to lead you to the synderesis, guide of the future. That's what all the karma is about. It's actions in the past that lead to the future, that produce our future. It's all about what we create now leads to where we're going into the future. That's where we're going. That's where the vision is. When you drive a car, where are you looking? You're looking at where you're going. That's living. That's life. Well, life is right now, but living is for the future, and you're living it now. Life is now, but you're living for the future. That's where becoming is. That's where the end and the goal is. It's just what manifests now is just what manifests now is just a representation, a reflection of what we are living for, trying to create into the future. We're heading towards somewhere, which is why we're creating now, is to go towards there. No? Or do you live a purposeless, meaningless life, not going anywhere towards some ends or some goal? And you just live a purposeless, meaningless existence. Well, I don't think anyone does that. So therefore, this is how it works. If you have a purpose and a meaning, you're trying to become something, you're living towards the future. So all this pseudo-spiritual bullshit about being the now and the power of now and the stillness and the nothingness and stillness and the now, you're going to understand this a lot more in my third presentation, but that all relates to what I've hinted so far in being static, fixed, frozen, dead. Yeah, when you're not living for the future, when you don't have becoming something, okay, you could be becoming worse, like evil people, I guess, becoming better, more right, more good, more true, living in truth. Well, that's a goal, that's a journey, that's an ends. There's a meaning and a purpose there. That's becoming towards something else. So if you're not living towards the future and you're only focused on the now, you're not living as a consciousness. You're stuck in a static, dead stillness, nothingness. That's what go within into the stillness and the nothingness and the void, and and people promote that as a meditation form. Okay, sure, if you want to calm yourself from the hecticness of your life and the shit of life and everything, sure, do that. Fine. It's a way to deal with it. But that's not the optimal, that's not about living. Be in the now, be here now, the present moment. But that's where you are. You can't live in the future, you live in the present, but you're living for the future. You're not living for what is now, to perpetuate what is now. You're trying to change the now to create a better future. You're trying to create what's in the future that you envision in your mind, that you have the foresight to see, and you're trying to bring that future from your consciousness, the foresight, the Eye of Providence, the transcendental consciousness. You're bringing that. You're grabbing it and you're actualizing it into you to manifest it into the present, into the now. That's the power of consciousness, to affect the primacy of existence, to affect the present, the now, through the power of consciousness into the foresight of the future, to bring that future into the now. That's the power. So this is going to be a part of presentation 3. You're getting a sneak peek of the information I'm presenting, that is the empowering information that's going to get you away from all of this externalizing, this projection, this reification, this objectification of some alleged force that exists outside of you, that's the source for truth and morality and the good and the right and authority too. What's the source of authority? That's the authority. It's all delusional thinking. As far as I'm concerned, there's no verifiability. The only in my work, I've been getting to more verifiability and away from belief, and this is what I've uncovered, is the way to verify where does truth come from, morality, right, good, authority. Where do all these things come from? They all come from your consciousness, from my consciousness. We are the powers, not some imagined force or some imagined being. It's all from your consciousness, imagining it, because that's the answer that you got to provide an answer to a question in reality. They gave you doubt, they gave you discomfort, they gave you stress, they gave you worry. There was an unknown that provided all those stress and worries and doubts and discomforts, because it's a void, it's an abyss in your conception of reality. Anyways, I've gone into this in previous presentations and how symbolism and consciousness and psychology, so please go look at it there. Alright, to continue, so you have one pole and two polar opposite ends. See, one pole has two ends. So duality is a part of polarity. Duality can be two things and not opposed as a polarity. It can just be a classification into two subclasses, or it can actually be a dichotomy of opposed parts. Polarity is two things, and they are opposite. Viewed as a pole itself, as the medium, the poles are opposed, but part of the same medium. So do you understand? The two poles will never touch. It'll never happen. The two poles never touch. They never unite. Okay? They're just part of one medium. They're part of one dynamic to make a contrast, a comparative analysis. So south-north, one magnetic field, but two magnetic poles. So the medium they're on is magnetism. But there's two parts to magnetism. There's a north and a south. No, they don't fucking unite. Sorry, but they don't unite, okay? Poles don't unite. Not literally. They're already united. North and south are already united as part of a magnetic field. That's the only way they're a unity. As part of the medium that they belong to. That one pole is the medium they both belong to, and one's a pole 1 and one's a pole number 2. They're two polar ends. They're dual ends on one pole. So yeah, they're united by the one medium, but they're not one. They're not united in the same. They're not united together, working together. They reciprocate from each other, but they don't work together at the same time. They're not attracted to each other. They're repelled. They're opposite. Okay, but it's in one system, one framework, one medium. So you have up and down. Well, up isn't down, and down isn't up. Hot is not cold, and cold is not hot. Very simple to understand. Very, 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 very simple. Up is not down, and down is not up. But here are two polarities. And they're a unity. They're opposite, yet both are required to make either one. You can't have up without a down. You can't have down without an up. They are complete opposites, but they are required together to make a unity of a concept. A concept of directional, of vertical direction. Okay? You don't have the concept of vertical direction without the opposites of up and down. That forms the unity of the concept through a contrast, a comparative analysis of two different aspects, forming a framework to understand reality. Okay? The framework to understand reality is this concept of direction, vertical direction. And how do you gain an understanding of that concept? Well, you have the contrasted aspects in reality of up and down that form that framework, that dualistic conceptual framework. So if you want more information on dualistic conceptual framework, I got work back in 2014 called the Dualistic Conceptual Framework. So yes, it does deal with my previous flawed frameworks, my flawed conceptions of an externalized, reified, objectified force or whatever, but that's because I was influenced by Mark Passio, and since then I have become more independent in thinking and more critical in evaluating the information that I believed to be true from other sources. I've had to reevaluate what I've already thought I evaluated properly, because I lacked the knowledge that I currently have. So, a pole is something of which there are two opposite ends. Some polar or dual aspects we discern can unite while others don't. So in this aspect, some dualities can unite, and some polar opposites can unite, as the example of hot and cold, up and down. They unite as a unity for conceptual framework. So they unite in that way, but they don't actually unite. They don't join together. They're a sort of a complement to each other for that dualistic conceptual framework, but they're not in operation at the same time. It's not like the unity of opposites of the left brain and the right brain. That symbolic characterization that we make about our own consciousness. Or the quote heart and the quote mind. That other separation in our own consciousness. That other dichotomy. That other distinction. That other classification. I'd classify them into two subclasses, as not as opposed parts. The left and right brain aren't opposed parts. The mind and heart aren't opposed parts. They're just two subclasses of what? Of consciousness. This is another way people are misrepresenting mind or heart and left and right brain. They're polarities. No, they're not polarities. They're not. It's not up and down. No, one's up and one's down. They don't. You can't both have them at the same time existing. No, left and right brain are supposed to exist at the same time. They're supposed to be a real unity, not a unity in the comparative, contrasting, dualistic conceptual framework like hot and cold is, or up and down is, or like good and evil is, or truth and falsity is. The dualism of left and right brain, or heart and mind, can actually become a true unity, not just a conceptual unity for a dualistic conceptual framework, which is what I'm talking about here, up, down, hot, cold, good, evil. Those ones can't actually unite. You can't unite good and evil, you can't unite truth and falsity, you can't unite up and down, and you can't unite hot and cold as things that both exist at the same time. These are true opposites that only unite as a conceptual framework, a dual conceptual framework. That's the only way they unite. They don't unite really. You can't unite good and evil. Oh, I'm gonna be both good and evil. No, you can be both left brain and right brain at the same time and use capacities of full consciousness to process reality and engage in reality and navigate reality. That's promoted and that's encouraged and that's what everyone should be doing. But you can't do it with up and cold. I'm going to go up and down at the same time. I'm going to go hot and cold at the same time. There's different dualistic conceptual frameworks. I've been trying to hammer this through at the beginning of 2014 when I started my site. One of my first presentations on the dualistic conceptual framework was dealing with understanding dualities and certain dualistic conceptual frameworks and how they're conceived and how... I just lost my train of thought. Oh yeah, and how they're not all the same. If you conceive of a duality or a polarity of one thing and another, and you're going to conclude they can unite, you can't just apply that basis of unity to everything that's a duality, because there's different types of dualities, there's different types of polarities. This is what I'm trying to say. The different types of dualities, some of them are polarities, and some of them are not polarities, but they are dualities, and there are just two parts. Subdivisions, subclasses. They're not actually opposed. So naturally, the just normal, natural unity of the polar opposites is up and down, hot and cold, good and evil. It's just naturally two polar opposites are united as being part of one dialectic, as being part of one dichotomy, as being part of one dualistic conceptual framework. Yeah, they're a unity because that dualistic conceptual framework cannot be conceived of, cannot be constructed if there's only one. It's not a dialectic anymore. There's no longer two things. It's not a dichotomy. It's not twofold. Then it's no longer a dualistic conceptual framework if there's only the one and not the contrast to compare to the other. But they're never united together. They're only united as being part of one dialectic. So this is the important thing to understand about polarity and duality. Don't just mix and mash them together, oh, they're the same thing. Or that all dualities are the same, they all operate the same way. They don't. Alright, so the next 17B, 17C, 17D, 17E, 17F, 17G are infographics that I've taken from Causality and Consciousness Part 1, maybe Part 2 as well. I've just put them in here. If you haven't been through that presentation, you can just go look through these infographics to help associate the previous work I've been doing with this work here to show you the twofold, the two main parts of our existence, which is reality and existence and our own consciousness, and how that relates in symbolism about ourselves and in symbolism that we've externalized and projected onto reality about ourselves, about processes within ourselves such as the alchemical transformation and self-transformative powers, the apotheosis, just betterment, evolution, change, improvement, transcendental consciousness. It's all about us. Instead of God, the generator of good, it's you and me, the generator of good, because we are consciousness. We've externalized our own consciousness, anthropomorphized, personified, projected, reified, and objectified it as that's the all consciousness. It's the absolute. It's all. Take some time to analyze your own conceptions and consciousness, and you'll see that they're completely unfounded in reality. They're not verifiable in reality. They only exist in your own consciousness. as an attempt to explain aspects of reality that you have questions and you don't have answers for. So then you invent answers to explain aspects of reality, and you create a framework to explain these aspects of reality. And you invent things, and you invent them based on a correspondence and an analogous correspondence and correlation with yourself and reality. And you get confused, and then you project yourself onto reality and objectify yourself into some other imagined aspect of reality. This is how it works. Go through my other work if you want to understand that, and if you don't, you just want to believe whatever you want to believe, you want to keep believing in your conception that comes from your own consciousness as if it was existence, well, then you can do that and ignore my work. I don't care about you ignoring my work. I'm not going to try to get people to go through it who don't want to go through it. As I've explained in some posts I've made on Facebook, you make a post and then people say, oh, well, I'm not going through your work, it's not what I like. Well, then there you go. Don't correct your whole basis of flawed understanding of yourself and consciousness and how they operate and to make sense of reality. Yeah, don't go through my work. Just keep believing the conceptions that you already believe because you don't like me as a person, because I spoke about demonstrable, verifiable conceptions in reality that can be shown in reality, and I'm quashing and I'm breaking away your bullshit. I'm destroying the falsity, but you can't handle that, so you don't like me anymore because because of the work I'm doing is insulting you and it's offending you and your beliefs and your worldview and your self-image and how you view yourself and how special you think you are. So you just want to ignore my work because it's going to take you away from that self-deluded, feel-good belief conception of reality and everything else that you have. I'm trying to take you away from the bullshit, trying to shatter everything that's false, take you away from belief and get you more grounded in reality. So that's what this presentation that I'm doing now is for. That's what the one I did before was for. That's what the last 10 ones I've done are for. Or actually, that's what the whole purpose of my site was for, was to get towards truth. It took me a while to really distinguish between belief as truth and truth as truth. So, it's taken a year. Started up my site, and at the end of 2014, I got into the trivium in language and reality, and that's what really made the change for me, was getting into the roots of how we even make sense of ourselves in reality, which is language and symbols. So here we have 17b, just aspects that we've externalized as heaven and aspects we've externalized as hell, and lower and higher consciousness, and God and the devil. Go into the other presentation if you want more information. 17c, same thing, different symbolism. Checkerboard floor, ladder, gone into that before, not going to talk about it again. 17d, just the aspects of, again, lower and higher and how it relates in symbolism. E, the Trinity of Consciousness, how we are consciousness, we're metaphysics, we're something non-physical, right? You can't measure consciousness. You can measure what happens in the body and in the brain, but the emergent phenomenon of consciousness itself can't really be measured. It doesn't. It's still quite a mystery how this emerges in the biological constructs and higher biological complexity. In animals, and then in humans, it's even more of a higher order consciousness due to our higher order complexity, I presume. Got to stop saying So 17e deals more with this internal and external aspect of consciousness and existence. 17f deals has more information with that relating to the Trinity of Consciousness and the trivium, calling it the wheel of life or the egg of life. And 17g also has the same infographic but altered information. In here you have truth level 1, that which is or has manifested into existence, the actual reality, and how that reality is consumed into ourselves, into the primacy of existence. To be is input, let's look at 17F, is consumed. We are affected and influenced by that primacy of existence, and then in turn our power of consciousness to change can then generate and create back into reality so back into truth level 1, which is the actual reality that is, from the power of our consciousness to envision truth level 2, the right path and way of living in truth, good, right, morality, potential. This is the potential reality that we can create into the actual reality. So this was about our power of consciousness. Infographic number 18. So here we're going to get into the original heart of the material that I was producing, even though this is a later infographic that I put sooner. All the terms and definitions, I hadn't even done that. I decided to go back and add that because all of the infographics that I was making to try to express what truth level 1 and truth level 2 is and how they function, well, I realized that maybe terms and definitions needed to be defined first to bring greater clarity to other people. So we have the truth, the two types. We have the potential for creation in the inner light of consciousness to become created as an outer light in existence. So we envision things from the inner light and we have the potential to create them in the outer light of existence. So this relates to truth level 2, which is derived from consciousness, which is the inner you, which is the quote higher and the quote spirit. So again, if you go back to the infographics that I just did from 17B to 17F, and you go check that other presentation on consciousness and causality symbolism part 1, you'll understand this more. That's why I put higher and spirit in quotes, because it's all this projection that we do that, oh, the truth, the true way to live, truth, good, right, morality, natural law it's from the higher self, it's from the higher, it's from the spirit, it's from God, blah, 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 blah. This is what I used to believe. But all it is it's from you, it's from consciousness. This is the great realization, the great empowerment in your life that you can have, rather than keep believing in bullshit that you've been told was true and you keep believing in it because it gives you the answers for questions that you were told were important, and then they gave you the answers, and then they made you feel good and special about your position in the universe and how special you are as a human in the universe and blah, blah, blah. Because of, oh, you're God and oh, you come from God and you're God's image and all this. It's all stuff to make you feel special about yourself by externalizing and having a connection to something imagined. When all it is you need to connect to yourself internally and realize your own powers rather than project your powers into some other being. So the T2 potential is envisioned from consciousness. It doesn't come, truth, love, good, right, morality, natural law, does not come from an imagined external force or an imagined external being. It all comes from your consciousness. This is the power of consciousness. Alright? T2 exists within T1. Consciousness exists within existence. Alright? Truth level 2, which is derived from consciousness, exists within truth level 1, which is derived from existence. So consciousness exists within existence. T2 is actualized into T1 from consciousness into existence. Truth level 2, moral good right, natural moral law, is from consciousness. It's actualized into existence. Very simple. So truth level 1 derived from existence, that's the outer universe, and that's the quote lower, the quote matter. So when you have the whole dichotomy of matter and spirit, lower and higher, well, this is how it fits in. All it means is you internally, your consciousness, and everything externally, your body, all of reality, everything else. That's the dichotomy at play. Is the world of matter, which includes static, fixed, persistent matter, as well as dynamic, changing, fluid movement, biological constructs of matter. That's truth level 1. And that's part of reality. In reality, you also have the consciousness, which is the higher life, the higher complexity from biological constructs. You have consciousness, and then you have higher ordered consciousness. But that's the higher and the lower. One's a lower because it's just static and fixed and it doesn't change. It's a rock, or it's a biological construct, so it has a bit more changing at the matter level. But the real higher is the higher in consciousness, which relates to the higher, realer, truer life. So that's the higher and lower dichotomy. It's not, oh God, and the all and the one, and all these other conceptions you want to have, and all these, whatever you want to define spirit as, and your pseudo-spiritual conceptions, and your fluffy puff, new age crap. The higher and the spirit is just you. And the lower in matter is everything else except for consciousness that is like us. That's it. The power of consciousness and the primacy of existence. The primacy of existence, and within it is the power of consciousness. That's the way it works. Okay? We don't have our power of consciousness. We don't exist as a power of consciousness without the primacy of existence. This is the way our existence functions. There is existence and there is consciousness in existence, and that consciousness has the power, potential to envision better ways to live, and then create and actualize that potential from consciousness into existence. And this is the scope of T1 versus T2. So when you have Truth 1 and Truth 2, the scope is that Truth Level 2 is in T1. Now if you looked at that infographic on Truth, I forget which number it was, but it had, the universal truth as a concept, particular truth, then it had Truth Level 2 and Truth Level 1. Well, in the context of Truth Level 1 and Truth Level 2, Truth Level 2 is within Truth Level 1, but in terms of time, where you have the actual and the potential, where you have the, if you're looking at it in terms of time, where you have the past and the present versus the future, well, the T1 is only the actual, which is the past and the present, and the potential for a better way to live, or the potential goodness, can have been actualized in the past, the present, or it will be in the future. That's why it has the greater encompassing scope. One is a scope within time, where T1 is within T2, and the other one is not a scope in time, where T2 is within T1. So I just want to make that clarification in case you're getting confused and you're saying, oh, well, in the other infographic, T2 encompassed T1, and in here it's T1 encompassing T2. Yes, but that's because of the different scopes. You have to look at how the vision, the perspective that you're looking at it. One was looking at it in reference of time, and this one's looking at it in reference of the two categories themselves, not with a third comparative level to merge them into. So it's just T1 versus T2 without the medium of time to join them into whatever. I hope you understand that. Just the two distinctions or the two scopes. So here's the main, one of the main ones on Truth Level 1 versus Truth Level 2 to try to explain it. So you have everything that exists, both the known and the unknown. That's the territory of reality. So I'm bringing in some other work that I've talked about, the map and territory distinctions. So everything that exists, the known and the unknown, that's the territory of reality. That's the absolute totality. So that's why reality is absolute. Existence is absolute. Truth is absolute because truth is merely a concept to represent the all of existence and reality. So that's the territory is everything that is. Now, what's known to exist isn't everything that exists. It's only what's known to exist. And this is our map of reality, or our map of the territory. It's not the totality of the territory. It's only a portion of it that we've been able to discern, to know, to exist. So Truth Level 1 is the is of actuality, what is manifested. What is reality as a current condition? And it's from objective existence, physical and metaphysical. The color blue doesn't exist in itself, so it's not a physical thing, but it exists in the physical as a metaphysical through an expression in the physical. So next we have truth level 2. So from T1, from truth level 1, from the actuality of manifested existence, we can aspire towards truth level 2, which is a better way to live. But first you need the foundation of manifested reality. And then we can be inspired into truth level 1 with that truth level 2. So we aspire in one direction, and then we are inspired in another. We aspire from reality to higher moral, true, right, and good concepts to live by. And then once we figure out and envision those better ways to live, we inspire reality and existence with that truth level 2 potential better way to live. So truth level 2 is the ought of potentiality, and I have gone into this in many presentations before, the dichotomy of is and actuality versus the ought and potentiality of what should be. It's currently unmanifested, or it may be manifested. As I said, we'll see more infographics on this related to time, but the past and the present can actually have an aspect of what ought to be living as a good way. It can be currently manifested now, but there's also better ways of living that aren't manifested now. So they're not manifested yet, but some of them are already manifested. So that's what that means. Unmanifested or manifested. It's what should be. It's the, quote, absolute ideal compared to the, quote, relative changing reality, right? What's good is always going to be good. No matter of time or place, if you're going to think of something as good, it's always going to be good. Even if there's something better, even if there's something worse, that good is always a good. It's an absolute. And compared to the relative changing reality, where things change, where that good may have been manifested 1,000 years ago, but then it stopped being manifested 100 years ago, it's still not manifested now. But since I can conceive of it, and I can trace it into history back 1,000 years, I can potentially bring back that ought that is currently unmanifested but was manifested, that absolute ideal. I can bring it back into relative changing reality, and I can re-manifest it now. So aspiring towards that T2 potential of a better way to live, that absolute, and I bring it back into the relative changing realities that change in time, because that's what time is. Time is change and flux and dynamic. That's what it's all about. That's where we live in time. We're all about changing and evolving, becoming. It's not about being static and just be in the now, be still, be calm. That's death. That's evolutionary death in consciousness. Especially physically too. If you don't do anything, of course you're going to die. But in consciousness and higher living, truer, realer living, it's a death in consciousness if you ascribe to that. So, what should be is the true, right, and good. We can take that absolute and bring it into the relative changing reality that might not have it right now. That might not have that truth or right or good manifested and expressed through someone's consciousness as a way to live. Or by everybody. So this truth level 2 is from our subjective imagination, from the quote unconscious, from the quote spirit. This ties into everyone's conception, as especially Michael Tsarion, who relates, well, ties into his infatuation with artists, as even Thomas Sheridan has, because they view the unconscious as quote spirit, as quote imagination, as quote that force, that externalized force that we somehow tap into. So that's why I put them in quotes, because this is all the symbolism of how we externalize ourselves into something else. So I do view panpsychism, Stoic physics, emergentism, different philosophies. I believe many of them have accurate, have plausible conceptions and possibilities, but I don't promote them as truth because I can't verify them. That's the distinction I'm making in my work. Talk about truth and distinguish truth from belief. So Stoic physics has interesting concepts, and panpsychism as well, and emergentism. I mixed them all when I went looking at what existing philosophies reflect what I currently conceive of reality that I've determined on my own. When I went looking at them, well, I found some things accurate and some things not accurate. So the way I view things that I can't confirm in reality, of possibilities of things that may be, possibly, I don't know, some aspects of panpsychism, some aspects of emergentism, some aspects of Stoic physics, some aspects of materialism. There's aspects in all of them that I put together, and it makes more sense to me in how I've been able to discern reality and consciousness and the fabrication of symbols and concepts from our own consciousness and try to give them an external reality. It just makes more sense because I can see the flaws in their conceptions where they've externalized something as a reality when it might just be a possibility, or it's a weak possibility. So I can judge and evaluate the different philosophies for where they're strongest and where they're weakest, according to myself. Whether it's accurate or not, it's another issue. Just these are beliefs I have. I'm not bound by them. The beliefs that I have and possibilities of how things are, but I'm not going to talk about them as a truth because it's just a belief. I could talk about them in a presentation as a belief, but it's not my concern right now because it doesn't really matter. Those answers, they're unanswerable and they don't really matter in the end to live more morally. So my objective is to get you to think more clearly, to let go of these beliefs so that you can understand where morality comes from and where truth comes from, rather than try to externalize it and project it into some force or being outside of yourself. So, what's possible to exist versus what's known to exist. So truth level 1 is what's known to exist. So I've been explaining how you know things. You go from existence to knowledge, which is just solo, non-contradictory. Then you apply logic, and then you get to truth. You synthesize it in a non-contradictory manner. But truth level 2 is what's possible to exist. So it doesn't exist yet from the consciousness imagination factory powered by an abstraction engine. So it doesn't exist yet. It's only from this imagination factory powered by an abstraction engine. You abstract, 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 imagine, imagine, invent, invent. And that's just in your consciousness. It doesn't make it real. But what is potentially generated is based on what is already generated. So the things you're going to potentially think of as better ways to live, or as things you can create into reality, is based on what is already generated. As I've mentioned in the beginning, relating to proportions and ratios and replication, or I forget, logic and whatever. What you're going to... Darn, I just lost my train of thought. Yes. So what is potentially generated? The existing laws, the existing ratios, the existing proportions between things in reality that can allow you to discern, and you can see those things that already exist in reality that are already generated, and then you can mimic them or alter them in ways that also function in reality, and then you can create new things, modify, alter, change. So it's the ability to create into the future from consciousness into existence. So we create forward into the future, right? Something wasn't here, and then we're going into consciousness, and then we're going to create into the future what was not here, and now it's going to be here because we're going to make it come here. So government didn't originally exist. Then we created it as a way of living, and then we lived it as a way of living, and here government exists. From consciousness into existence. That's us creating into the future. And we can change. With things we've created, we can unmanifest them. And 19b and 19c, these are from the part 1 reality processing presentation. Knowledge and light, and this had to do with the two lights. We have the external senses, the light in reality, then we have our internal senses, the light in consciousness, and how this produces the input and the processing in order for us to develop an understanding and a wisdom to then output into the future. So the past, the knowledge of the past, the input from reality, leading us to being wise in action, and how this relates to syneidesis, which is with knowledge, learning from the past, understanding, wisdom level 1, but not real wisdom of acting, and then that wisdom level 1 which is an understanding, which is a knowledge level 2, a deeper understanding, an actual understanding, not simply knowledge data input about something X, but an understanding of that X, more of a purpose and why and meaning of that X, what it's purposeful in doing, what it does. Then you understand. Then you have a wisdom, but it's only an initial wisdom. When you have proper wisdom level 2, that's the wisdom of right action, and then you can guide yourself into the future with that wisdom of understanding in reality. So that's syneidesis, and it helps you towards synderesis, a guide to the future. You watch over with that knowledge from the past. So I've talked about this in the other presentation, and it will be part of this one as well, as I've already talked about it, and there'll be an infographic upcoming at the end to describe it a bit more with the etymology. 19C is also from the past presentation. This just helps to refresh your memory of how absolute and relative relates in reality. If you're looking at a dualistic conceptual framework, something that's united in a comparative analysis such as good and evil, you have many things in reality, all of the variability. You have relative degrees on that scale. Many things fit into different positions relative to each other and relative to each other within the relation of that X or minus X, such as good and evil. They all fall in different scales. They're not all as close to good as the other one is, or as close to evil as the other one is. There's different, a murder isn't the same as a theft of a pogo or a carrot or whatever you want to call it. But one thing, when you look at one thing itself, not in relation to everything else, but one thing within that dualistic conceptual framework, such as good and evil, then you don't have a relative degrees. All you have is an absolute, either it is good or it is evil. Because you're not looking at it in relation to other things. Well, it's good, but it's not as good as this other thing. Well, that's back to the top part, relative for many. So there's different levels of applicability for determining if something is an absolute or a relative. This is just a refresher on that. Infographic number 20. This one, again, just another way of expressing existence and reality versus consciousness and imagination. Let's just start with the left side. So we have physical data. That's it expresses the metaphysical. So you have the physical itself, but it also expresses the metaphysical. The metaphysical is expressed in the physical. It's non-existent in itself. Okay, the color blue doesn't exist in itself. It exists in something physical that expresses that metaphysical property. So the metaphysical needs the physical to exist. So I could put metaphysical completely in consciousness, but the color blue isn't in consciousness, it's in reality too. So that's why metaphysical is split into two, both in existence, reality, and in consciousness, because I'm trying to give a dual meaning here. There is the metaphysical things in the physical, such as tall, short, soft, hard, blue, red, whatever. So those are metaphysical things that exist in the physical. But since I'm talking about existence and consciousness, I'm not just going to put metaphysical only in the physical in existence and have the bar cut it off, and then consciousness doesn't have any metaphysical attributes to it. So that's why I cut it in half again, to put metaphysical as the bridge, sort of. It's it's a conceptual bridge between consciousness and existence, in terms of consciousness needs the physical to exist. Our consciousness, okay? You want to talk about other realities? I don't live there. I don't talk about other realities, other dimensions, and whatever truths exist there. I don't live there. I can't verify anything over there. You want to talk about that all your life and pretend that those are truths and believe in them as truths? Well, you go ahead. I know the definition of what a truth is, and it has to do with verifiability for veracity. So that's what I do. Now, consciousness, the way we exist, needs the physical to exist. So, consciousness isn't the color blue. We're not talking about things in existence themselves, blue, tall, short, okay? Or else metaphysical would only be up there. They wouldn't be separated into two. But I separated it into two because consciousness is metaphysical. It needs the physical to exist. It's non-existent in itself. It's expressed in the physical. Consciousness is expressed in the physical. It needs the physical to exist, and it's not existent in itself. Show me consciousness, show me here in our reality, consciousness existing without a physical body for it. Where's the consciousness? Are you going to talk about channeled entities? Well, they exist in another reality. Maybe wherever they exist in their lower reality, and yes, it is a lower reality, and yes, we are at a higher reality, and I will explain that in future presentations, but it would take too much time to do it now, even as a tangent. They are at a lower reality, we are at a higher reality, they don't have a physical existence, so I don't care how their existence operates. I'm talking about my existence. Here, right here and now. And that's in part 3, it might be part 4. A whole clarification on the whole be here now. It's about not going to other dimensions, not going to, other planes and realities, and that's the truth there. I don't care one iota, one bit, what the truth is in some other reality or dimension that may or may not exist. I don't give a shit. I'm talking about my reality, where I live, and I exist here, and anything else you want to claim as a truth somewhere else that you can't verify is not a truth. It's a belief. Period. So existence, reality, is with or without consciousness. Now what this means is you can have an existence and reality without consciousness whatsoever, because consciousness needs reality to exist. Reality does not need consciousness to exist. So existence and reality can exist with or without consciousness. If there were no humans, if there were no animals, there would still be existence and reality, because it does not depend on consciousness. Consciousness, how is consciousness defined? Consciousness. Consciousness. Now, I've already defined it etymologically, so if you're going to apply a different definition than the etymological true meaning of the word consciousness, then what the hell are you talking about? Why don't you invent a different word? Because I'm telling you what the word means. I've defined my terms straight from the etymology, straight from the words, straight from the symbolic references to reality, and if you want to change that meaning, well, you do it at your own detriment and obfuscation and confusion for your own consciousness, because I will not accept your definition. Create a different word. Consciousness, with knowledge, knowledge together, one or the other. It requires knowledge, and knowledge requires existence. So a consciousness, as the word is defined, cannot exist outside of existence. You want to talk about something else? Well, then call it something else. But it's not consciousness. Thank you very much. Please use this. This is the word of reality I'm talking about here. Consciousness can only be used in the word that it means, as it means. You talk about God. God is not consciousness, okay? You're imagining things. You're projecting yourself. You're trying to create something that doesn't exist. And if it does exist, it's not consciousness. It sure as hell ain't like you or me. You're just giving it attributes of yourself to try to make it like you, so you can feel special about yourself. Oh, man was created in the image of God. No. I've said this before, I think 2 times already on previous presentations. God was created in the image of man. That is how God was created. God is a conception invented in consciousness by human animals. That's it. God was created by man. Man was not created by God. Everyone has it backwards. So many people in the truther movement think they're so evolved and intelligent and understanding existence and reality. Existence and reality is truth. It has to be verifiable for its veracity. And they're making all these wild claims about truth which aren't verifiable. And they go propagate them and they mind control people. It is mind control. If you convince someone of a belief as a truth, you're mind controlling them. Even if you don't even know what you're doing is mind control. If you think something is true but it's not, it's only a belief, because you can't verify. Even if it's a true unknown somewhere, but you can't verify and you can't demonstrate it as a truth, then it's not a truth. And if you propagate it as a truth, it's not a truth. Go back to the word and what the word means. That's what I'm doing. So people clear up your confusion and your obfuscation of your terms and definitions. Because you're creating a big cesspool of definition and meaning where nothing means what it's supposed to mean, and everyone gets confused because words change meaning and they get morphed and altered and they don't even represent reality anymore. That's what I'm sick of, is all this manipulation of words. And Orwell had it right. Newspeak, man. And the most degenerate, people might hate me, urban youth. Urban youth is like the most degenerate aspect of devolving consciousness. Because it all ties into personality and identity and rebellion, because the way the current system is pretty much anti-truth. So people recognize that as at a subconscious level. So rather than rebel in consciousness by seeking truth to counter the falsity, they're too confused about how they're even unconsciously aware of the falsity and rebelling against it. So they rebel against the establishment as a counter-establishment and counter-cultural means. So tattoos, piercing, bullshit ideologies, bullshit changes of expression, changes of clothes, changes of fashion, but it's all an externalized rebellion against the establishment and the falsity that they intuitively and unconsciously recognize, but can't consciously process it in critical thinking to actualize changes in meaningful ways in their consciousness in their lives. So even though they're rebelling in useless ways, essentially. But they still think it's valid, and they're going to rebel. And so there's all these bullshit rebellious ways. The real way that matters is in consciousness and learning reality. But the urban youth movement rebels in stupid fashions and stupid idiotic languages. I used to be infatuated with the urban youth. Rap and hip-hop. It's all degenerate bullshit. Oh, give me a break. Anyone who wants to argue this, I've been in that... I used to like that music and all that. I like the beats and the melodies. That's what I liked about it the most. The lyrics were mostly garbage, except for underground hip-hop. But it's just the whole mentality, the dress and the speak is all a devolved countercultural method that you're trying to go counter the establishment of falsity merely based on an externalized differentiation and an externalized rebellion, and you think that means something. And oftentimes that does lead to a consciousness revolution, where you change your way of thinking and you realize things consciously rather than subconsciously, unconsciously rebelling in external ways. Yeah, that external rebellion can sometimes lead to that inner powerful rebellion, but many times people don't go further in truth or morality. They get stuck in their group identities that they've formed in these counterculture groups, and this becomes their new group identity. But they like it because it's counterculture to the unconscious aspects of falsity they recognize in the current culture. But it doesn't help anything. They're not going for the true thing, which is truth and morality. They're just going for, change my haircut, piercings and tattoos and all these external bullshit changes. They don't matter. They're actually a degenerate change. But you think it's a positive change just because it's a change against it's a countercultural change as a rebellion against the establishment, where you think the way people look or dress or their hairdos or all that matters. And just because you're going to change that's going to matter and you're going to become independent, you're going to become an individual now? No. You just become another brainless cog who can't use critical thinking to think of the reality that matters and assess reality properly to see what's actually wrong. You're just going to counter-culture, rebel, and create a new subculture which isn't better than the other one. It's actually more degenerate. Really, it really is more degenerate, but you think it's better simply based on a blind correspondence, a blind analogy of culture bad, counterculture good. So then you're going to stay immersed in that counterculture and form an identity upon it simply based on the animosity, the polarized enmity of the current establishment and current culture. That's not becoming a true person. You're just rejecting one and going towards another. Just because it appears to be a polar opposite, and that's another thing about polar opposites people get confused in dualities. Is, if one's bad, then the other's good. No, they're both idiotic. Or you're mixing up appearances with substance. You subconsciously recognize the substance of the current culture and establishment is wrong. But the appearance, who cares about the appearance? But the way you're rebelling, you're not rebelling against the substance of the culture or the establishment. You're rebelling in a counterculture of appearances, not of any substance. So you're not even attacking the thing that's causing you this turmoil, stress, or depression in your life that makes you go towards a counterculture through recognition of the insanity of the normalcy we live in. But you're not even going from the substance. You're going from appearances. The only thing you're changing is appearances, and then you're degrading yourself. All these countercultures often have less evolved, less conscious ways of living. So they change at a physical level, but then at a substantive level of living their lives, they actually devolve, and they think they're evolving just because they're going through a polarized counterculture. Anyways, I've gone on a tangent for a long time there, and this is a bit ridiculous, but let's continue with this infographic. That was valuable information that I think many people don't consider about all the countercultural things. You're going to rebel in appearances, it's useless. You need to rebel at the substance level. You can keep the appearances of the culture, who cares? What does it matter? That doesn't make you more independent to go counter that. Doesn't make you more of an individual. It just makes you conform to the counterculture, conform to another rebellion. It's just a polarized delusion. Anyways, so existence in reality is real, actual. It's absolute. In relative changes over time, though. That's where it's relative. It's relative changes over time, but it's always absolute. What's now is now, and it's absolutely what is now. Absolutely, well, there you go, that's what I wrote. Absolutely what is now could have been different before. Relative diversity of existence. So you see where I quoted? Absolutely what is now, present, but could have been past, different before the past. Because when you look into is and being, when you look into being and becoming, those are just tenses of the verb be, to be. And so is, and so is are. Those are just, and so is being. Is, being, are, be, being, becoming. It's all the same verb, but through different tenses. So now consciousness is imagination. It's the ideal potential that we can envision and imagine in our consciousness. Doesn't make it real. It's relative because at any moment you can change what you're going to think of as an ideal potential in your mind. You can think of a better one. Okay? But at that moment when you have that aspiration of that good, that is an absolute good in your aspiration in mind, and you can bring that into reality and try to create it into reality as a way to live, to inspire it into reality from that aspiration in mind. So if you looked into my previous work where I was into the belief of the force of truth, love, good, right, morality, natural moral law, I had a presentation on spectrum of living, and in that presentation I've talked about inspire and aspire. So you can go back to that presentation, and with this knowledge of what I'm talking about, these redefined terms and the power of our own consciousness rather than some externalized force, the aspire and inspire in that presentation, spectrum of living, you can reinterpret it as your own powers. So my work is still valid, it's just you need to redefine certain terms and reinterpret it. So it's relative because it can change. What you imagine can change, but it's absolute as an aspiration in your mind. Once you set that aspiration, it's an absolute and you're going to work towards it. You can change it at any time because that's what you do. It's relative. You can change your mind at any time. So the potential future that is relative to the absolutes in existence now. So that's why it's relative and potential, but that's also why it's absolute. And existence is absolute, but it's also relative. So do you see how absolute and relative apply to both existence, and absolute and relative apply to both consciousness? And to the right, I have just an infographic from the previous work, Causality and Consciousness Part 1, relating to the trivium, input, processing, output. Reality is input, you're affected by it. Then you process it. The middle pillar of foundation, right? From the in to the out. If you don't have this middle pillar foundation, there's nothing coming in and there's nothing going out. So processing is the middle pillar foundation. This is where logic is. This is to understand why. This is to gain understanding. And this is to gain truth. The middle pillar in this example, in the trivium example, input, output, and processing, in causality and consciousness part 1, I have this described. Processing as the why, as consciousness, as the part of understanding, and this is how you understand, and what I've explained in this presentation so far. Remember knowledge level 2, which is understanding, and then you get to that understanding is wisdom level 1, then you have wisdom level 2. Well, from knowledge to understanding, that understanding is understanding why of that knowledge. Knowledge can just be a piece of data, but the why is from the understanding, and that comes from logic. And that leads you to truth. The knowledge is just knowledge, but when you apply logic and why, and answer why, and gain an understanding, then you have a closer grasp of the truth, simply as a blind acceptance of knowledge X being knowledge X. You need to understand why. You need that understanding part. So infographic number 21. Sorry for the length of this presentation. Obviously all my presentations are going to take long when I have this information that I need to elaborate and expand upon, as I'm trying to just give you as much information as I can so that you can understand what I'm trying to express, because the understanding I have in my consciousness is a certain level, and then the ability for me to express what I understand in word symbols for you to understand is a level removed from the consciousness and understanding I have myself. So I have to restrict the words and symbols into infographics, and then I can elaborate upon them with my verbalization and speech. But even then, I could still be missing some things that are in my consciousness that are not fully, are in my unconscious or subconscious, that tie into my conscious awareness of things that I have yet to fully uncover. But when I talk about them, it helps me sometimes. I can uncover new things in a presentation. So that's why everything is so long when I do it, because I'm trying to give you the most amount of information I can so that you can understand what I understand. Or else I'll just make the infographics and I won't do any presentations, and you can just go read my infographics and see if you understand what I'm trying to tell you. And I doubt you'll come to the same conclusion or as in-depth of a conclusion or an understanding of reality compared to if I was actually presenting my infographics. So anyways, that's just a little explanation for, or a little sorry for why it takes so long every time I do presentations. So 21, we have the is and is not. Right, we're talking about reality, what is and what is not. So we're gonna, rather than just talk about truth level 1 and truth level 2, I was like, well, where does falsity come into this? How does falsity fit into reality? So that's what this infographic is going to attempt. I'm not just going to talk about truth level 1 and truth level 2. I'm going to talk about truth level 1 and falsity level 1. I'm going to talk about truth level 2 and falsity level 2. And we're going to see how they work in consciousness and reality. So, what is true in reality, is real, and is existent. So that can be both a truth level 1 and a falsity level 1. Falsities do exist in reality as a truth. So this is how I kept analyzing and dissecting and dissecting and dissecting truth level 1 and truth level 2. So I realized, well, there's falsity in reality, it's all around us, but it's not the truth level 2 we can bring in. So there's another compartmentalization of where falsity fits in with truth and reality. Like, how does all this fit together? Well, that's what I'm trying to explain here. This is what I have determined by analyzing reality. So, is right, good, and true way of path. This is the two levels of is. There's what is true in reality, right? The truth level 1. It's real, existent, both as truth level 1 and falsity level 1. Whatever is. There's good and there's evil. That's what it is. It's a falsity or it's a truth. The falsity one is not true in reality. It's a lie. Sorry. I'll do the two first ones, then I'll explain them, because it's been a while since I've been through this work. Like I said, most of this has been done in June, so July, August, September. July, August. Yeah, okay. 3 months. I thought I was miscounting. So what is true in reality. It's real and existent. What also is what is right, good, and true way and path to live. And that's also what is potentially real and existent. It can be a real and existent, true way and path to live right now, what's existing in reality, but it can also be unreal because it's non-existent. Because that truer, gooder, righter way and path to live has not been actualized in real existence. It's not manifested as a T1 in actuality. It's still only an unreal non-existent in the T2 potential of our mind. So these are the two isness. These are the two levels of truth. One's true in reality and one is a true way to live that might not exist in reality. Now the is not it's not true in reality. It's not non-existent and unreal. So say you're trying to get to a location and you're supposed to turn right, and someone tells you, no, you're supposed to turn left. Well, that's not true in reality. If you want to go to this place, you don't go left, you go right. So that's not true. But also what is not true is what is not a right, good, and true way and path to live your life. So there's what's true in reality and what's not true in reality. Then there's what's a true way to live and what's not a true way to live. So those are the distinctions between truth level 1 and truth level 2 and falsity level 1 and falsity level 2. What is true in reality, what is not true in reality is unreal and non-existent. And that unreal and non-existent thing can be a falsity level 2. See, because a truth level 2 is unreal and it can potentially be unreal and non-existent in reality. It's envisioned in consciousness. So in consciousness, you can envision unreal, non-existent things that are not true in reality, right? It's not existing in reality, but you envision it in your mind, so it's only existing there. And then if you act on it in reality, then it can become true in reality, then it becomes a falsity level 1. So what's not true, what is not right, good, and true as a way and path to live, can be a real existent thing in reality, though. So it can be a falsity level 1. It can be a way someone is choosing to live in reality that is not right, good, and true. But it's still real and existent. So it's not right, good, and true to murder someone. But if you do murder someone, well, that is a real and existent part of reality. That's an F1. It's an F1 in T1. So it's truth level 1. That's a part of reality. But more specifically, it's a falsity level 1, because within truth level 1, you have falsity level 1, which I have elucidated in the illustration, in the infographic. So truth level 1 contains falsity level 1. But where does that falsity level 1 come from? Well, it comes from that imagined, unreal, non-existent falsity level 2 that we are then going to create as an existent aspect of reality. Just as we do with truth level 2, that doesn't exist but only in consciousness, where we imagine it, and then we create it as an existent aspect of reality to live by as a truth level 1. So truth level 2 can only become a truth level 1, whereas a falsity level 2 becomes a falsity level 1, which is a truth level 1. You understand? What exists as a false way in reality exists as a part of reality, but it's a false way to live, but it still exists. You understand? Truth level 1 contains falsity level 1. It's reality, both the reality of what is false and the reality of what is true. But the wrong ways to live, that's falsity level 2. And the true ways to live is truth level 2. Making more sense? So let's go into the infographic. Truth level 1 is reality. It's the true and false ways in existence, both what is true as a way of existence, the T2, and false ways in existence, the F2. So it's the actual, the now, and the manifested reality. The current reality changes over time. It's relative in time as being what is or has been. So it's relative. It changes over time. What was before might not be what is now. So that's why reality is relative. But it's always absolute. Whatever is is absolutely what is in reality. It's absolute. But maybe it wasn't there before, maybe it won't be there in the future. So it's relative. You see how relative and absolute work in reality? So the truth level 1 contains both physical and metaphysical existence. Falsity level 1 is reality. Now this is the existing ways of falsity. Yeah, so what I was saying before, got confused about, well, there are false ways of living that are lived, and then there's actually telling falsities. You know, go left when you're supposed to go right. Well, that was false. It's not it's an existing way of falsity, but it's not a false way of living. You know, a moral, it's not like a moral wrong, it's just a mistake. So it's false. So if you go back to the truth distinctions, you know, there's the universal truth concept, there's particular truths, and in particular truths, there's truths about reality, and then there's moral truths that we can bring into reality from our consciousness. So the existing ways of falsity can be existing moral ways of falsity, and they can be also non-moral falsity, just as, well, I was supposed to turn right, but I turned left because I had the false idea that I was supposed to turn left, but that was just a false idea. And it exists. I went left, so that it exists that I went left, and that was a false way. I wasn't supposed to go left, but I did, so there's an existing falsity. I hope this is, you know, it's very intricate. There's many levels of applicability. You can't just say, you know, truth and false. It applies in different levels, in different ways. So it's relative falsity, it exists now. It changes, but is currently a falsity now. That's why it's part of truth level 1, because it's actually in existence right now. So I have the circles, T1 to T2 to T1, the same thing with F1 to F2 to F1. Just I didn't want to put the letters on the red side. So we're aspiring to a truth level 2, and then we inspire it back into truth level 1. And if we're polluted in consciousness, well, then we can envision false ways of living. From reality, we aspire towards F2, false ways of living, and then we inspire that F2 into the reality as an F1 into T1. So from a falsity 2 that we are aspiring towards, we then inspire that falsity level 2 as an actual falsity level 1 in truth level 1 of reality. So truth level 2 is true, right, and good. It's the way and path of greater potential, absolute truth compared to relative, actual, lesser truth extant now. It's always right, good, or true, no matter what is. That's why it's an absolute. Because it always is, no matter what is. It's always going to be good, it's always going to be bad, whatever. Same with the evil. It's always false, no matter what is. It's the way and path of greater potential, absolute falsity compared to relative, actual, lesser falsity extant now. So you're going to be increasing the falsity compared to what is now rather than decreasing it when you're working with truth level 2. So again, as above was the actual now manifested reality. This is the potential future unmanifested reality. So just some clarification. Lies are truly spoken, Lies are truly spoken but are not true. Falsity is truly lived, F1, T1, but is not a true way to live. It's not a T2, it's not a true way to live. It might be truly lived as an falsity 1 from the falsity 2 potential in truth level 1, but it's not a true way to live, T2. Universally, absolutely true or false when created in relative time to make it relatively more or less true or false than what was before. So if you create something better, you create something worse, then it becomes either absolute or relative in your conception, and relative to what exists now or before, what will come. So that's how the absolute and relative works around that. Generating in the real, genuine, or authentic, the ma'a, as the good and true, generating in ma'a, versus the unreal, disingenuous, inauthentic, contrary to the good, which is isfet, the chaos, ma'at or isfet. So this is what the whole dichotomy is. You're going to generate in truth level 2, or you're going to generate in falsity level 2, and this is how everything works. And except, of course, there's there might be a neutral neutral actions, but those aren't, it's not really what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about truer, righter, gooder ways of living. So of course there's actions that involve no morality whatsoever in part of your decision making in everyday life, and they can be right or wrong decisions, but I'm not talking about those in terms of morality. T2 and F2 is morality to bring into the truth level 1 of all of existence and reality. One last sentence here. The future potential cannot be generated without first the generated, as there needs to be, as there needs a base to compare to derive a greater potential. So you need a base to compare to in order to derive a greater potential. If you don't have a base, you don't have anything relative to create something better as an absolute to then bring into the relative and have the relative change. When I say it makes sense, because I am understanding, I made this presentation so I can understand the shifts in relative and absolute that I talk about. You might not understand it, so take some time, reflect upon this presentation, and maybe you'll understand when I talk about relative and absolute, and in quick ways like this that might be confusing to you, but after some time you should get it. Take some time. It took me some time to really understand. Okay, infographic number 22. This is dealing with 2 levels of reality. So we have reality level 1, which is the objective is of actuality, the absolute, right? Absolute. Something exists. It absolutely exists. It's what is. It's reality as the current condition. This is both pre- and post-human. As I said, existence can exist with or without consciousness in 2, 3 infographics previous to this one. Reality level 1 is existence, which is the primary existence itself, even without consciousness, without any consciousness whatsoever. And then we have the secondary human-created reality, the human-created world. So when we're talking about reality, when I talk about how we can affect reality and how you can say how we create reality, well, it's only that we are creating the human-generated reality. We didn't create, consciousness does not create objective existence. Consciousness creates the secondary human-created reality world. All this world, the human world we live in, would not exist without human consciousness. That is the God power we have in our lives over existence, is to modify, alter, and change the primary existence itself. But we do not create the primary existence itself. That's a distinction that needs to be understood. So objective existence, it's the physical and the metaphysical. So the rock and the rock that has brown, gray, purple, pink, and blue colors in it, and everything. And of course, what's in reality is the metaphysical of consciousness. So consciousness exists in reality. It's an objective existence. You can determine it exists. Even if you can't measure it, you can verify and demonstrate that consciousness exists, even if you can't measure consciousness. Okay? It's not about measurements. That's in the scientific establishment, where they need to specifically weigh and measure things in quantifiable measures. When I'm talking about verifiability, you just need to verify it in reality. If there was only one consciousness in reality, well, could you verify if consciousness existed if all you had was one source of yourself? Yeah, you'd say, okay, consciousness exists, it's myself, there's the proof. But it's a lot more verifiable, right? There's a lot more validity to it when you have multiple sources. So 2 people, 3 people, 5, 1,000, 1 billion. Then you can recognize, okay, there is consciousness, it does exist. It's not just me. I didn't just create this whole universe. There are other people. Reality level 2, so reality level 1 has those 2 levels within it of existence itself, primary existence, and secondarily human-created existence. Human-created reality and world. That wouldn't be there without human consciousness. Important to understand. Then there's reality level 2, which is our subjective perception of reality. And that's the relative part. So there's objective is actuality. That's absolute in reality. And what's relative in terms of reality is our perception of reality, our worldview, our self-image. That's relative to us. Our level of conscious awareness of reality, our level of brain damage, our level of congenital defects and brain formations and neural networks, whatever. We're all different. We all have different diseases and different capacities and different hindrances and different handicaps. And some people don't have the consciousness capacities as other people, unfortunately. I think it can be developed. I don't know why. I relate it to bringing up epigenetic, environmental, social, rather than biological, which is why I say at the beginning of this presentation, the power is to transcend both the biological and social and environmental conditions, because those are, one's genetic, biological, and the other one is epigenetic. Epigenetic just means beyond it. So beyond the genetics, past the genetics, well, what's there? Well, the environment. That's what we're talking about, right? The environment and society. That's what forms us a lot more than our genetics. So conditions to be less cognitive would be influences to be less cognitive, to play with your dolls or play with action figures, be less intellectual, play more sports, all these things that are emphasized. There's many, many, many other aspects. Seek entertainment, seek pleasure, seek gratification, seek comfort, seek enjoyment. And this takes people away from that tiresome, troublesome, analytical, judgmental, dialectical, logical process of consciousness in order to discern reality more. That's a lot of work, and people just don't really want to do that. So it's a lot easier to remain not very developed consciously in consciousness and your capacities of consciousness to discern reality. So you're going to end up with a subjective perception of reality, which is relatively based on yourself, your own conditioning by your parents, by your peers, your friends, the TV shows you've watched. I'm not the same as my sister. We have the same parents, but we're different. And so the level of my consciousness is based on epigenetic factors more than it is on genetic factors. It's based more on environment and society, on all the environmental factors that have come forth in my life, than it is on biological genetic factors that have been imposed upon me prior to my conscious life. But they all have an effect. So anyways, consciousness is this reality level 2. The first one is the primacy of existence. That's reality level 1. And reality level 2 is the power of consciousness. That's subjective perception of your reality. Or we can all have relative differences of how we perceive reality, even though reality is always the absolute. So this includes unreality perceived to be real. No one occupies the same space and time to gain the exact same knowledge of reality. Changing angle, viewpoint, or perspective in reality allows for more data input of reality. Deceptions and delusions can occur from false understanding. You have your knowledge, someone else theirs, and there is an overlap of common knowledge from living in the common objective reality, not each in our own subjective reality. We don't all see 100% the same things at the same time in existence, causing some confusion on objective reality and truth. So people want to argue, well, no, your reality is just as valid as my reality, and my opinion is just as valid as yours. No, you're treating your opinion and your perception as reality when it isn't. It's only a subjective assessment. It's a map, and a flawed map of the territory, and there's only one territory, and if your two maps are different, one of you is wrong. Okay? It's not, oh, well, you have your opinion and I have mine and you have your perception. No. That's all bullshit. Bullshit. There is a truth about something. There's not contradictory truths about something. There's not two different maps for one area. Maybe your map has more data on one little thing, and their map has one more data on one little thing, and if you put your two maps together, you can get more data together, but they're not going to be contradictory maps. Because in this position I have this, and in this position you have that, well, we can't both be right. That's right, because contradictions don't exist in reality. They only exist in human consciousness. And so do paradoxes. Paradoxes do not exist in reality. Paradoxes are an attempt to reconcile a contradiction by wording it in convoluted, obfuscated, contradictory ways to make yourself seem clever, which is really popular in the New Age movement, all this convoluted bullshit. So you twist it around, you create a paradox with convoluted language, and you attempt to express a truth through contradictory, paradoxical language because you think you're being clever. Well, it's not clever. It's a limitation in language that we've imposed multiple meanings to symbols, so that when you use the symbol and you describe something, it has one meaning if you read it literally, but then if you take chunks and you dissect them separately and then you reevaluate them with an actual truth, rather than the convoluted, contradictory bullshit paradox in the statement, you have to reevaluate the paradoxical statement to make the contradiction non-contradictory by changing the grammar or the way the words are arranged. So you decode a message. That's the only purpose in them. People think they're clever by obfuscating and making confusion in these phrases because you sound clever and you sound spiritual by making these bullshit paradoxical statements. No, it just creates more confusion for people because you're not using the clarity of definition and identity of terms to bring about more understanding for people. You're trying to encode these truisms or whatever, paradoxical truisms, you split it in half and it's true one side and it's true on the other, but you put them together and they're not both true, but you're still going to put them both together to make a clever bullshit pseudo-spiritual New Age statement. And oh, look at that, they're both together. It's a paradoxical statement of truth. No, it's just your consciousness going haywire, trying to be all clever and special by putting things together that don't belong together. And calling it a paradox, and look how wise I am. You're not wise, you're an idiot. I've seen this over and over in New Agers. Pseudo-spiritual bullshit thinking. They think they're all clever and wise. Oh, that's deep. Oh, that's real deep, man. Oh, yeah, that's deep. It's deep because it's fucking bullshit that no one understands unless you already understand what they're talking about in a contradictory manner so that you can decode the contradiction and make it non-contradictory. Yeah, that really sounds like an evolved way of progressing and describing ideas and concepts and gaining clarity with people. Yeah, bravo, idiots. Alright, so we'll continue with the last sentence here. We don't all see 100% the same things at the same time in existing. I already read that. Causing some confusion on objective. Blah, 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 blah. So, what you can see, how much you can see, depends on your vision. What vision am I talking about? I'm talking about two visions. One's the perceptual vision of reality, that you can see with your senses, and one's the inner vision for what you do with that data knowledge, that bare knowledge that you've taken from reality. What are you going to do with it? What are you going to do with it? Well, you need your inner vision. So what you see and how much you see depends on your vision, which depends on your level of consciousness and higher consciousness capacities, and whether they're developed or not, or whether you are developing and working on developing them or not. And that's how much you're going to see and what you can see. So I can see things, I can see more things than other people because I have a deeper vision in consciousness. All this information I'm able to present is because I've went in the vision of my consciousness and I have shone some light on different aspects of reality, and then I've constructed light constructs in my mind to base on those aspects of reality, and I see if they reflect accurately, if they're parallel, they're processing in parallel, or if they're disunited, incongruent, and contradictory. And whenever there's a discongruence, a contradiction, I know there's a problem, and I work to resolve it. And that's what's gotten me to this point. Here. Away from the beliefs I used to have in this externalized force and being. Because now I understand what the word consciousness means. Really, I understand what the word truth really means, and I understand what the word belief really means, and I understand what the word knowledge means. So, how much do you understand? Do you understand what I'm talking about? I hope so, because I'm trying hard to express it. Existence to knowledge to consciousness. And the only way you gain knowledge is with consciousness. But that's how it works. And then from there we create symbols, and then we create all the magical world we see around us, and all the concepts and meaning and the abstractions. But it all starts from reality to knowledge to consciousness, and then we create symbols from them. And as I mentioned earlier, on the degrees of accurate perception, the degrees of verifiability, this was the infographic I was talking about that I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation. 22B. Did it on the previous presentation. I think it was in reality processing, the presentation before this one, so go ahead and take a look. Infographic number 23. This is similar to another one I've done based on Mark Passio's work on the frequency of truth and alignment of the frequency of truth with the frequency of your perceptions and consciousness with the frequency of truth. So how much you're going to be, in alignment with truth. So our perception and reality, when they're parallel processing, this is the ideal 1-to-1 ratio. Is when your perception is in alignment with reality. You're processing reality in parallel with reality. You're not processing in your consciousness imagined constructs and then taking them as reality. This is a more accurate inner light and inner vision of consciousness to generate a better T2 potential. Alright? But when your perception is incongruent, disharmonious, misaligned with reality, well, it's not parallel. So what do you have? You don't have that ideal 1-to-1 ratio anymore. You're out of sync with reality. What happens when you're out of sync with reality? Well, then you're accepting perceptions of things and creating fabrications of things in the perceptions of your consciousness as reality when they're not reality. This produces a less accurate inner light and inner vision of consciousness to generate better T2 potential. So this is why the awareness of reality is required to lead you towards better T2 potential, because if you're not aware of the evils in reality, then you're not going to be able to recognize the evils in order to envision a better way and stop doing those worse ways. Perception, so when perceptions are equal to truth level 1, which is reality, which is existence. So when perceptions equal existence, when you're parallel processing in that ideal ratio, what you're going to get is more perception of the T2 potential to create, that truth level 2 potential to create. Because you're seeing reality as it is, you're going to be able to see the good and the bad, and you're going to be able to see how to improve it. Whereas if your perceptions are not aligned with reality, you're not going to be seeing the bad for what it is, and you're going to see the bad for the good. So then your T2 potential, you're going to have less perception of the T2 potential to create, and you're probably going to create more falsity potential. Falsity level 2 potential is going to be used. Because if you can't see the evil, then you're not going to stop the evil, you're going to keep perpetuating it, especially if you think of it as good. So you're certainly not increasing T2 potential, you're stagnating. And since you've already you continue to accept those falsities and those evils as right or good, then you're going to build up other constructs based upon those more foundational constructs, and you're going to create more and more falsities into reality. That's how that works. Alright, 4 infographics left, but they might be big, heavy duties. Anyways. Truth level 2 T2 is an ideal path potential. The absolute future aspiration until realized, and it's relative to now. So it's an absolute future aspiration until it's realized. Then it becomes a relative present inspiration. Because it's relative to now, but it could change in the future. And it could have been different in the past. That's why it's relative. So, I put the infinity symbol because that's what it is. That absolute, that truth level 2 it's infinitely better than whatever lesser good exists now. So we can infinitely imagine greater potential goods than what currently exists now. That's our infinite potential to better ourselves. We think of a better thing today, we actualize it tomorrow, and then tomorrow when we actualize that better thing, we can envision an even better thing. That's why it's infinite. So truth level 2, right, good, and true, the idealized ideal idea. That's what it is. It's just an idea. It's the ideal idea, and it's an idealized ideal idea. Talked about that in consciousness and causality symbolism. The absolute potential at a given time relative to what is not manifested as a potential now. There's always more to discover as a potential. When a potential is recognized or actualized, new vision emerges, new possibilities emerge, emergent phenomenon or properties come forth. But they weren't there before because you weren't at the level required for you to see that new level. So you see how it works? But the more levels you climb, the more you can see further ahead of you. So the more you progress, the more you can see ahead of you. The same principle. We're dealing with the future. Okay, we're living for the future. It's all about becoming into the future towards a meaning and goal, of end and purpose. We're doing something. We're living. We're evolving. We're changing. We're not staying stagnant, comfortable and convenient in our lives and the way things are. We're trying to improve ourselves. We're trying to better ourselves into the future. You can't better yourself or improve yourself now. Now is now. Now in the present it can't be changed. It's undone. You don't have the power to affect change in the present, what's already done. You have to think of the future and how to change what the present is going to become, so that when we go and refresh the present with the future, that we're bringing in the future we want to bring in as the present, rather than keeping the present as a stagnant present that it is, with all the corruption and the impurities and all that crap and the evil and the wrong, injustice. This is the whole point of living, is about looking to the future. That's what the Eye of Providence is. It's about foresight into the future. It's all about the future. But the whole New Age movement has you focusing on now and stillness and just being. It's wrong. It creates this convoluted, conceptual, axiomatic foundation for you to live your life by. And so many people are poisoned with this. So we can easily waver from the path and way of the potential ideal good we know that can be, but can always choose to return to the one absolute extreme of truth, level 2, we envision from consciousness. So that's why there's the winding path. You go off path and you loop around, you go backwards, you went forwards, but then you go backwards, you were a better person, then you go backwards, you're a worse person, but then years later you come back and then you heal yourself and you're back on track. Now that's an example. And to the right is, we aspire towards the absolute, that absolute infinity, the absolute good that can always be more and more good, better and better and better. It's an infinite potential, it's a better way. So when we can be aware, recognize, or actualize, or reach one level of potential to then become aware of the next potential. That's how it works sometimes. Sometimes you can't see ahead. You have to be at this certain level to see the new possibilities, the new vision, and the new emergent phenomenon that evolve after you've actualized a certain level of reality. Because if you haven't actualized a certain level of reality, you can't see the possibilities that come after that actualization. Because if you were at a pre-actualization, before this new actualization, it didn't exist, so you would only have your powers of consciousness to imagine the future potential you can create after you actualize that one. So it's possible that you can do that, but it's when you reach a level, then you can really be at that level to see where you are at, rather than look at it from foresight without actually being there, trying to envision what's going to come. But when you're actually there, you don't have to envision with the power of consciousness. You're actually in the reality, and you can see the light of reality, the vision of reality, and the light of reality around you, rather than try to create an artificial, subjective multiverse construct in your mind, a light hologram, whatever you can call it, that isn't actually in reality yet. And your imaginations might be accurate, but when you're actually there, your vision is improved. rather than looking at it from further behind. You're farther away, your vision isn't as good. Okay, infographic 25, we're going to explain this more in terms of the temporal aspect of truth level 1 and truth level 2. This one's more colorful. You can see the gradients in the red and the blue and the green there. So we have time. Anything prior to now is the past. Past is, has, was, and the present is what's now, and the future is possibly will be. So in the time we have potentials. We have a potential of a moral A, a moral X, a moral Y, existing in reality as the past is, has been, was existent 1,000 years ago. But then we lose morality A and we only have morality X, and we lose morality Y, but then we add morality Z. But then we lose morality X and we only have morality Z, and then we bring back morality X and morality Y from the past, and we bring it now actualize it into the future. And then into the future, well, are we going to still have X, Y, Z? Or are we going to lose them? In the future, are we going to still have moralities A, B, C? Or are we going to lose them? Or are we going to bring B and C, which we didn't have before? It's how long will it take to manifest a better way? So this is how to look at truth level 1 and the potentials of truth level 2 manifesting in truth level 1 along a time scale, how it fits in temporally. Because as I said, you can see the potentials, which is truth level 2. Well, those potentials are both in the past, in the present, and in the future, because they are absolute truths, moral truths that you can determine. Whether it existed or hasn't or will exist, it's still a moral truth. So this is, I called it consciousness living in existence. This is how our consciousness can operate in existence to modify existence. So T1, as what is or has been, it's the real or actual, and it can include the actualized truth level 2 or falsity level 2 as the current condition. These are the effects created. This is the actual primacy that exists. It's the primary knowledge of existence. This is also the current ways of being. And this is syneidesis, the past, the knowledge of the past. Everything in the past and the present is the knowledge of existence and the current ways of being. So now if you're going to look into the future is, possibly will be, that will be T1 as what can be, but it's not T1 as what currently is. It's not the is. It was what can be, not what is. So the potential future actual can include a T2 or an F2. So that potential that we're talking about, I'm not talking about purely T1 and purely T2 in these things. I'm talking about the actual, the present, as the truth of what is, including the false ways, the falsities and the lies that people propagate, and the potential, the future that can be. Those also include the potentials we can envision that are both good and evil, both true and false. We can envision anything. And these are not yet created. They're the potential to change the actual, either towards the better or towards the worse. Whether we're even aware of changing it towards the better or the worse. The envisioned change comes from consciousness and then we act on it, whether it's a truth level 2 or a falsity level 2. There's the power of consciousness to alter. We envision different ways of being. And this is synderesis about the future. It's about our guide to the future. How are we creating into the future? The effects are not created. It's the potential power from culture to alter and envision different ways of being. So how are we creating into the future? What's our guide to the future? Are we going to be using truth level 2 or falsity level 2? How much of the past do we know in order to determine the wrong ways and correct our mistakes? Infographic 26. This is past and future vision. More description on syneidesis and synderesis or synteresis. So knowledge from the past as a guide to watch over the future, to not repeat mistakes, to create better. That's what living's about. This is what the whole purpose of existence is, no matter what anyone tells you. It's about learning from the past, to not repeat the mistakes so that we can create better into the future. It's to remove evil and create good. Remove falsity and create in truth. Let go of the wrong and go towards the right. Be right or go wrong, truth or consequence. That's the purpose of existence, as far as I can determine. That's the meaning and purpose, the goal in the end for all of humanity. Okay, this is the universal goal and meaning and purpose based in truth and morality. That's what all of our purposes and goals are. I'm not talking about individual goals and purposes of whatever each person wants to have. Not what I'm talking about. So, syneidesis is conscience as passing judgment on past acts as opposed to synderesis. And it's from sin, with or together, and eidene, to know. So it's to know together. And hence why it's related to conscience, just to know together. Synderesis is conscience as a guide to future action, as opposed to syneidesis, from sin, with, and terrain, which is to watch over, or to keep guard. To keep guard with, to watch over with. With what? With knowledge. So note, conscience for morality is the past. In the past is knowledge. Eidene. While conscience about the future actions is about watching over what will come to be. Conscience about morality in the past is knowledge. Conscience about future morality and actions is about watching what will come to be, and that's all based on what was already happened before. What happened before leads to what we are doing now, and what we do now leads to what we do in the future, what will come into the future. So this is what it's all about. This is existence. This is how we operate. You learn from the past, you keep memories, so you have knowledge of the past, and you learn from it to not repeat the same mistakes, and that knowledge provides a guide for you to watch over yourself and your future actions for what will come to be. The knowledge comes from the past to guide us into the future. We live in the present, but work and live for the future. It's the important thing to understand. We live in the present, yes. Okay, we're here. But we work and live for the future. We're living for the future. He who controls the past controls the future. He who controls the present controls the past. So if you've never heard this quote from Orwell, please reconsider it in the context of what I'm talking about. It'll make a lot more sense of the power of that saying and the importance of it. You control the past, you control the future. Because if you control the present, you control the past. So everyone who controls the present, all the information and spin doctors and people creating history, they control the present, and they control the past, the information you have access to in the past, the schooling establishments, everything. They tell you what you need to learn. And if you can control the past, then you're going to control the future, because you're not going to learn from your mistakes and you're going to keep repeating them. You haven't done something yet. You think about what you are going to do. You go into the future in consciousness based on the present and past in existence, and then you will bring that future potential into the now and act upon that conception of the future you created in your mind. So close to making it under 5 hours, but I think it'll just be just over 5 hours. Final presentation, final infographic, number 27. The Eye of Providence. So this is leading... I'm bringing this here because it ties into the information I've been talking about. But I'm going to talk about it more... Well, relate it to more aspects of our powers of consciousness and how we externalize them in part 4. Because this is all introductions to get rid of that confusion, that imagination and that we create and invent. That'll be in part 4, but introducing it more in part 2 here. Because part 1 is reality processing, even though I didn't call it part 1. So the Eye of Providence, that's the all-seeing eye, and it's the one eye. When everyone talks about the all-seeing eye, the one eye, you want to talk about your third eye as well? The dual united as one, that creates the Trinity, the tri-eye, the third eye. From the dual eyes, the dual vision. You see the vision of the past to create into the vision of the future, the vision of good and evil, so that you can choose to create into the one into the good. You have the knowledge of the two, and it leads you to create into the one, into the good only. You need knowledge of the two, the dual, to become one, to create in the good only. Get it? So the future sight, the eye of providence, the one eye, the all-seeing eye, the apotheosis, to become God, the power to transform the actual from the potential in consciousness, to envision how to go forward based on where we have been. That's what it all is. That's what the eye of providence is. Though the divine eye of providence, the divine eye, you think God is watching over you and taking care of you? No. You watch over yourself and you guide yourself, and if you don't, you're a fool. So this is the all-seeing eye. It's not God. Where's the all-seeing eye? It's you. Where's the one eye? Is it God? No, it's you. The eye of providence, is it God? No, it's you. Well, if you've developed these capacities in your consciousness, or maybe you haven't and it's not you, but I'm telling you, you can. The eye of providence, the all-seeing eye, the one eye, it's all symbolism for you. Dig into it more. Stop believing what all these pseudo-spiritualists and all these people have been regurgitating information for thousands of years from these occult societies who keep people dumbed down. And oh my God, really look at symbolism and how it reflects reality, because it's a joke how you've been convoluted into accepting symbolism about invented imaginations and fantasies. It's all about us, the power, the all-seeing eye, one eye of providence is you consciousness. See the eye and the rays and the sun and the keys and the ankh? We'll go back to my previous infographics and previous presentations on Egypt and the sun, and try to correlate what the eye symbol means, envision what I'm talking about here in this presentation, and try to correlate what the sun symbolism means in terms of higher consciousness, and the sun and the light versus the darkness, and the moon and the sun symbolism. And it's all different layers of symbolism playing on different aspects of understanding ourselves in reality. It has nothing to do with some imagined being or force. That's all envisioned and imagined from your consciousness without any verification or verifiability in reality to demonstrate it as such. It's a purely concocted story and narrative of fantasy in your mind. Anthropomorphizing it, saying, oh, it's the will, it's the divine will, oh, it has care, it has will, it's the source of love and care and will, and oh yeah, it has its own consciousness, it's its own identity too. Please, yeah, just keep extrapolating from yourself and projecting onto this imagined force and being. Congratulations on doing that. And you think that's truth. So the eye of providence is foresight, prudent anticipation, foreknowledge, precaution, to guard against beforehand. Before it happens, you're going to guard against it because you have foreknowledge and anticipation and foresight and precaution. And again, the wheel of life, dharma and karma, relates to this as well. I would have to review my older material to connect more dots and bring it into a more meaningful way. But if you go look into that and how it relates to... just one second. Yeah, the wheel of dharma, the wheel of karma, the wheel of time, the wheel of fortune, the wheel of fate, the wheel of destiny is all the same thing. And if you look at these words, look at these last ones, okay? Really look at them. Really understand. Look at the similarities. Time, fortune, fate, destiny. So what does that all deal with? Well, there's one word in it that expressly tells you what it deals with. It deals with time. Okay? So when you have the wheel of dharma, the wheel of karma, the wheel of time, fortune, fate, and destiny, so that all deals with the future. Going into the future, you're wheeling towards the future. Yes, of course, it deals with the past and the present that leads towards the future, which is why dharma and karma are included in this conceptualization, although minor variations. But it all deals with the future. So that's what the eye of providence is. You want to become God, like God, in control of the human created reality that we've created, and alter it, change it, and fix it, and make it right, and change it. Well, you need to understand what all the symbolism is about the power of ourselves and how we can affect reality. And part of it is the wheel of dharma, karma, time, fortune, fate, destiny. And that's our foresight to be in control of our own futures, the time, the future, our own fortune. Fortune all deals with future. Fate all deals with future. Destiny all deals with future. These are all future concepts. They're all concepts about the future and the importance of leading yourself into the future. Well, these are all ancient symbols. But all the ancient symbolism, I'm telling you, it's all talking about morality. It's all about living into the future in a better way, in an improved way. So, fate, destiny, fortune, time, it all has to do with foresight, prudent anticipation, foreknowledge, precaution, to guard against beforehand, before it happens. Then you have the apotheosis, and then you're in control of your human destiny, your human fate, your fortune and time. You have the Eye of Providence, you have the all-seeing eye, the one eye. You're in transcendental consciousness. But prior to me explaining all this to you, or other people might have been telling you, you might have thought, or other people would keep propagating, oh, this is all God. Eye of Providence is God. All-seeing eye is God. The one eye is God. Transcendental consciousness is God. And all the wheels I've been taught, oh, God's in control of all those wheels. It's all... I see the delusion now. It's so obvious. Alright, so let's continue. We have syneidesis, which was the past. So now we're talking about synderesis. And it relates to the Eye of Providence because we're talking about the future. Alright? Oh, I forgot the etymology. So from providence, from provide, provision, from pro, ahead, and vider, to see. So it's about seeing ahead, look ahead, prepare, supply, act with foreknowledge, foresight. It's about acting into the future by seeing the future before it comes so that you can create the future you want to create. This is the power of consciousness. It's all been symbolized and externalized into bullshit. I'm telling you, get out of your consciousness, imagination, abstraction engine, imagination factory of inventing bullshit and believing it to be true, or imagining possible truths that you can't verify, and declaring them to be truths even though you can't verify them to be truths. Distinguish. Learn terms and definitions and use them appropriately in reality. Conscience as a guide to future action, as opposed to syneidesis. That's what synderesis is. I've done it in the previous infographic, did these breakdowns. So it's to watch over with knowledge. So this is about generating, manifesting, creating, and becoming in time. Providence, fate, fortune, and destiny is about the future. Providence is about behavior and action based on knowing what will happen through pattern recognition of knowing it will happen from a causal relation to predict it. So pattern recognition, that's why I put all that stuff on pattern recognition and consciousness, because it has completely to do with knowledge and completely to do with your ability to lead yourself into the future. And why a causal relation? Because it's based on causality of what came before to what is now to what will be in the past, and repeating patterns of what came before to what came after in the past that repeated over and over. And if that happens in the present, well, it will create that same future that already happened in the past. That's how we learn from our mistakes. We can see repeating patterns. Okay. A precaution is to guard against. Synderesis is about our future actions. We watch over the future with knowledge of the past, with which to guard ourselves. To watch and guard is also to protect. We protect ourselves in survival with knowledge of the past, syneidesis, to determine what future we are creating with the continuation of current actions, allowing us to change with foresight. If we want. We can see the current actions we're doing, and if we see it's producing the same result, we can change our actions to produce a different result. The Eye of Providence, fate, etc., the providence of, quote, God, is our consciousness uncovering reality to recognize patterns of causality and make sense of what came before to see what will come next. The transcendental consciousness that watches over and guards us is ourselves. if we choose to engage in this voluntary, willful, higher order power of consciousness. The eye is the vision of wisdom from acquiring the light of truth and morality. So you want the vision, you want the light, you want to see? You want the vision to see? Well, you need the light of truth and morality, and that's going to give you the vision and the wisdom for the Eye of Providence to lead you into the future. That's the way it works. And voluntary, willful higher order power of consciousness? Yes, because if you recall my presentations on causality and consciousness symbolism, on the power of consciousness and the primacy of existence, what's in the power of consciousness? What was that part in the trivium that's in the power of consciousness? Well, that would be logic, the foundation in consciousness which allows you to gain greater understanding of reality so that you can become wiser and more able to navigate reality through that capacity. So I guess that's about it. Well, I have some more. No. That's it. I have some notes underneath this one, but I'll leave it there. And we have, I added, this is all about, all this information I've been trying to do these past few, 10 presentations. It's all about empowering yourself, really recognizing where that power is in your consciousness to affect the primacy of existence. It's not the primacy of consciousness. It's not about God and all these other powers that you imagine. The power is in you. I'm trying to show you the power in you. So the 27B is a previous infographic that I've made on empowering change to understand how the change happens. So once you understand that the change is within you, you can go to this infographic. I've done a presentation. It's on YouTube, just to describe it. If you can't follow the infographic implicitly derive what's explicitly explained, derive it implicitly on your own. Well, I explicitly explain it in more detail in that little presentation on this infographic. You can email me if you want to know, whatever. So I'm not going to go over it, and that's about it. So thank you very much for your time and attention. It's a very long presentation. Thank you very much again. Thank you for whoever listens to this. Thank you, and I hope you learn from it. Thank you for paying attention and taking the time to learn these deep, complex aspects of reality. Thank you very much from the top and the bottom of my heart. It gives me great joy that people actually care to go through this information. Anyways, thank you very much for listening and paying attention. Have a nice day. Take care. Peace.